from the belt to the plate. A swing and a miss, and that's the winner. That's the winner. A World Series winner for the Cardinals. Smith corks one into right down the line. It may go. Go crazy, folks. Go crazy. It's a home run, and the Cardinals have won the game by the score of 3-2 on a home run by the Wizard. Go crazy. Swinging a long one into left field. Adios, goodbye, and maybe that's the winner. A 3-run homer by Clark, and the Cardinals lead by the score of 7-5, and they may go to the World Series on that one, folks.
What a team. What a ride. The Cardinals are world champs in 2011.
Welcome to That's the Winner podcast. As always, I'm Ryan Jenkins, and with me, as always, is Josh Brown. Joining us tonight is Jeff. Jeff, thanks for joining us. Let's see if we got your audio. We haven't tested it since you just jumped back on. Let's check it.
Test 1, 2. We'll see how well it's working right now.
I got you. I got you. I think that way far. So let's get kind of in it and let's talk, Jeff. So you write for the Belleville News-Democrat and a little bit MLB.com. Are you from St. Louis? Like what I like to do is help people understand some of the writers and stuff as well. Just so you can be able to people get to know you a little bit better as well.
From here, grew up in Belleville. Grew up on the. Have lived here for most of my life. Was in a couple. Was C for about a year and a half. So moving back.
Yeah, it's cutting out. It's cutting out still. Hard on you. I don't know what it's an internet signal sound is what it is, but
all right, I can do here. Hold on 1 second. Let me try.
All right, he jumped out for a second. We're going to see if we can get him back. Josh, so let's talk about a little bit. Last conversation we had, we talked about Nolan Arenado and his opt-out, and would he or wouldn't he, in that he finally opted in. He didn't wait the 5 days that he had until after the World Series that he could have drag it out to. In our conversation, we talked about why he would opt out. And we said that there was all these good reasons. There's been a lot of conversation about that over the last week.
There's 20 million good reasons.
Yeah, 20 million good reasons for him to be able to opt out, and he did not. So were you shocked that he did not opt out, or I mean, what's your thoughts on his opt out or opt in? I guess.
Yeah, we stirred up the pot.
Yes, that was
a
the
little
goal,
bit,
right?
saying that he would opt out. But if you watch our podcast, if you read any of our tweets, neither of us thought that he would not be a St. Louis Cardinal.
Right.
So big difference. And the reason we thought that he was going to opt out is because there was a clause in his contract that we verified with Spotrac, however you say it.
Right.
But you can go to Spotrac.com and look up any MLB player's contract, and it'll show you all the clauses, the opt-outs, all the money that covers, especially with Nolan's deal. It was so odd with what the Rockies are kicking back, but there was a clause in there. If he had, it was either one of the two. If he had opted out after 2021,
both times, right?
Yeah, or opted out after this year. So either one, if he had opted out in one of those, he would just on the spot have gotten 20 million from the Rockies before he signed anywhere else.
Right.
And so the big deal for the Cardinals and him opting in is it saves them 20 million more over the course of the next 5 years.
Right.
Not all at once.
As a
It'll
Cardinals
help pay.
fan, it's great. Jeff's back with us. Let's see if I can pop him back in and see if we can get it going. Jeff, are you there now?
All right, so we hopped from Safari over to Chrome, and maybe this is a little
There
better.
we go.
That's what it is. There we go.
It sounds much better. All right, so
I'm glad you said that. Now we know moving forward to tell some guests
Well,
to use Chrome.
to be honest,
maybe.
to show how the sausage was made, when you mentioned that Tim had a similar problem, I know Tim is also an Apple guy, so I sort of wondered if maybe that was the problem that it had.
Yeah, I'm a MacBook guy as well. I've always used Chrome though, so I didn't even and now we know.
Now we know.
Now we know the troubleshoot it.
Chromebook thing. Okay, so
Gotta
Jeff,
figure
you
it
heard
out.
us talking about it a little bit. I don't know how much you want to get into it yourself and the things that you may know about it. But
we were talking about the 20 million potential good reasons that Arenado had to opt out.
Yeah, that's an interesting clause, and that, as far as I know, would be unique in terms of the way a contract was structured. Most of what I know about that deal was based on the original reporting that Ron Blum did for the AP when the deal was announced, when the trade happened. You saw a similar piece from the AP when Adam Wainwright signed his deal the other day. So that did not include that in it. But also there was a little bit of confusion in the overlap in terms of whether the offset this year is 21 or 16 with 500 extra year. There's a little bit of vagary with some of that stuff. And it hasn't been a thing that I know that any of us have been able to really clear up all that well. So it is an interesting notion, the idea that no one would have turned down kind of that chunk of change from the Rockies directly with the opportunity to double dip. I do think that it is important to know, like, if he had opted out and then you re-signed an identical deal with the Cardinals, the remainder of the cash that the Rockies would have given the Cardinals was nullified, right? Like the remainder of the cash that was in the deal was contingent on that original contract being fulfilled. So, look, one could make the argument that if Nolan was feeling particularly spiteful, and I don't have any reason to believe that he was, but, look, holding a little bit of grudge against the Rockies, one way to do that is to make them continue to pay. I don't think it probably is the issue, especially given that Jeff Bridich no longer works there. But it was a notion that crossed my mind once or twice in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and so Ryan, I mean, we were telling you we've had Katie Wu on the podcast before, who you know very well from your time covering the beat and you guys in the press box. But she had mentioned that she was going to reach out to Nolan, or she had maybe, and that his agent said maybe he wasn't quite aware of that. But look, we know that Mo flew out there to Southern California, right? And those guys met. And odds are, even if he had known about it, maybe at the end of the day, it just wasn't about money to him, because like you said, that $20 million now gets kicked back to the Cardinals, not all at once, but over these next few years, it helps go towards paying off his contract, which if he wants payroll to go up, that should give DeWitt and Mo a little bit more money in the tank, a little bit more in their pocket, maybe to get the payroll a little higher these next season.
Well, and I think realistically too, if for Nolan, the bottom line was always going to be about pure dollars and cents, that would have been a really easy decision. You make a comparison between, for example, the deal that Freddie Freeman signed last winter versus what Nolan is owed here over the next 5 years. I have no doubt in my mind that Arenado could have opted out and vested what he is still due on his deal, regardless of who's paying him for it. So I think it's pretty clear that was maybe not his number one consideration. And I think also too, there was a lot of reporting about the conversations that Arenado had with the Rockies front office before being traded after signing that deal, and then into the next winter, and what those discussions looked like with their front office and the ways in which that kind of went into the way he was disillusioned in Colorado. I think it's notable that Mo goes out on a Monday and they sit for dinner and they have the conversation, and then within the week, he has the commitment to be here for the next 5 years. So it's a similar conversation that clearly took a very different fork in the road.
Right. Yeah. Well, so let's get back to the original part where I was trying to ask you about if you grew up in St. Louis and where that part came from. People didn't hear that part because of the cutout. So I want people to learn a little bit about you, so people gives you less hate on Twitter, I think is the best way to go about it, right?
More followers.
My mute button works great. Y'all can do what you want. Pay your $8 a month to hop to the front of the replies. That's your business. I grew up on the Illinois side. Grew up in Belleville. And lived here for all of my life. I was in Chicago for a couple of years and in DC for about a year and a half, where I covered the NHL a little more seriously out there. And then when I moved back here, if you want to be in the sports writing game in St. Louis ball, and that was honestly not a thing I really seriously considered in the past, but it worked out to being, I don't know, something I love. And I can't imagine going back to a non-daily beat now after having done the last 5 years. It's been a really big change, but a really welcome one, and one that's been, I don't know, things you could never have expected to see. Just actually today we had a lunch meeting with the baseball writers, and there was some discussion about some of the things that went on in 2020, and like things you could have never ever anticipated to be able to live through and have a chance to cover has been honestly really special over the last few years.
So did you grow up a Cardinals fan? I know being close, but were you a baseball fan? Were you a Cardinals fan growing up?
Did, yeah. I grew up a Cardinal fan. My big claim to Cardinals fan, everybody's got like an event they went to when they were a kid. I was at Game 4 of the '96 NLCS, where Dimitri Young hit the triple and Brian Jordan hit the go-ahead home run to win that game in '96. And my fun little story from that game is that my dad somehow ended up with tickets that would have been at Old Busch in the front row down the first baseline. But for the postseason, I don't know if it was just that year, probably so, because it hadn't been a postseason there since '87. they built in 2 extra rows of seats in front of where the front row used to be at Old Busch. Now, I was 9 years old, and so when these were built on field level, I couldn't see the field, couldn't see anything because I was exactly level. But right in front of me was an older African American gentleman who had on just a heinous tan and purple Bill Cosby sweater. And so Dimitri Young hits this triple into the left field corner, people going crazy and high fiving or whatever. And this man turns around and my dad kind of nudges me and says, "Give him a high five." It was Lou Brock. I was 9 years old. What do I know? But we were sitting right behind Lou apparently for the entirety of that game. And I still have somewhere a little kid Cardinal hat with a Lou Brock signature on a ballpoint pen that he was nice enough to sign for me underneath the hat bill. So that was probably my best Cardinals memory as a kid.
That's a great
awesome.
memory right there.
And it's hard not to be a Cardinals fan after that. Like, you're locked in forever. Once one of those types of events happen, you're in there forever. Well, we had the privilege.
I just real quick. When you do this job, you see people at the ballpark, and I honestly don't get fazed by it. I famously one time blew past J-Lo to go talk to Mike Schilt. Didn't even see her. She was there when A-Rod was doing a Sunday night baseball game, and I ducked through her security guards because it was post game time. 2 times I've been in line for food in the media room and behind somebody where I felt myself get the celebrity thing. The first time it was Bob Uecker, 4 years ago. I was right behind him and he was getting food, and I was. And the second time it was really weird. I didn't anticipate it, but this summer was Brian Jordan. When Atlanta was in town for their series, he does TV for them. And I was in line behind Brian Jordan, and I was like, "Mr. Jordan, I guess I got to tell you, I was at this baseball." He was very nice about it, but he was like, "I'm just trying to get dinner, man. What are we doing here?"
That's awesome. Great. Well, we had the privilege of sitting next to your mom at the last game of the season.
Small world.
At the Cardinals game this year, and we were looking for dirt for one. She asked why you weren't. We got somehow into the podcast. She asked why you hadn't been on, and yada yada. And now here we are.
How many beers deep was she at this point?
I never saw any beers, to be honest.
No, we saw no beers.
Yeah,
no beers.
Okay.
But
there was a lot of tears that game, from everybody, because it was the last one for Yachty and Albert.
But we asked for some good stories or something we could, razz you with. But the only thing she really gave us is that you wrecked a car when you were 3 years old.
I did. So my one of my claims to fame here, and wreck is strong. But if you go to Disney World now, when you get your car from valet, they shut your car all the way off. And as the legend goes, when I was about 3 years old, we took a family trip down to Disney World, and we had one of those big old conversion vans, with the carpet inside and the massive roof and all that. And my sister at the time was about a year, and she was getting loaded into her car seat. And I climbed into the front seat to pretend drive behind the wheel, and apparently either kicked or grabbed the gear shift to pull myself up and pulled the van into drive. So it started to roll away while my sister was being loaded into her car seat. My mom was screaming and my aunt was screaming. And the valet guy, I guess, ran around and threw the thing back into park. But now I'm told that if you valet at Disney World, they turn your engine off and they hand you your keys, so that doesn't happen.
Just because of you. Well, your mom was very nice. We appreciate it. Hi, Mom, if you're watching or if you see it later. We have some questions coming in, so let's go to.
I was gonna say that's a good one to jump into. Maybe start some conversation.
Seth Teal, he says, "Do you see the Cardinals making a big splash, Jeff? Thank you, and your podcast is great. So
appreciate that.
Thanks, Seth. So here's the question I want to piggyback with Seth on. I think a lot of talking heads in the radio world and different places are telling everyone. I think they're pumping everyone up to think that the Cardinals might be in the market for a shortstop. So I'm going to use Seth's question and twist it a little bit. Do you think the Cardinals are actually in the shortstop market? And if not, then like Seth says, where do you think they're possible to make a splash?
So I thought that the proclamations that payroll was definitely going to go up were interesting, kind of given who's available in the market and what we know about what the Cardinals do and don't like to do and the ways in which they're going to spend money. To say that payroll is going to go up, it would be very hard for me to find a trade that would make payroll increase. I mean, unless we're talking about literally Mike Trout, there's really not a lot in the trade market that would really increase payroll to any kind of significant degree. So if we are talking about free agency, shortstop is an interesting place to look because there's no way they go into spring training next year operating under the assumption that Paul DeJong is going to be on the roster, let alone a starter, right? And so the question becomes, who is playing shortstop on opening day. The answer could be Tommy Edman. I do think that the folks who are very excited about Mason Wynn, I understand that. That doesn't seem like a guy who's likely to break camp with him. That would be, I think, a pretty huge surprise. And so if that's the case, it's really hard, I think, to sort of plan for, 2 or 3 years down the road, this guy actually might be what we need, so we can't jump in on one of these great shortstops. So the short answer to are they in the shortstop market is maybe. Right, but it would. I don't know. I will be very curious to see where the market leads with some of these guys, because I think of the big 3 shortstops that are going to be available, I think most people would say that Turner is the best option, that Swanson is perhaps the option that you would like to stay away from. And then the question about Correa just becomes, how well do you think he's going to hold up? Is he still a shortstop in 3 years? And what kind of market, what kind of deal is he looking for? Correa, to me, is the one that's interesting. That's the one that would seem to fit some of what they need. And that would also, come with some risk and come with some challenges. And it's also, frankly, Correa's been through a winter where we know the market was soft. If it wasn't, he wouldn't have signed the deal that he did. So how much in a year has that changed? I don't know that it's a lot, especially given that he had a very good year in Minnesota, but not a year that's kind of, not the kind of platform year that you might think of for a guy who wants to go back through the free agent market. So that to me would be an interesting place to look.
Yeah, I mean, I think about what Mo said in the presser recently when he said we are a pipeline-driven organization, and what I take from that is meaning we're going to use our young guys that are cheap and be able to fill in the other places. And I think Mason Wynn is a part of that plan, right? That the goal would be that he comes in not in 23 but in 24, so they're probably not going to clog up the middle infield anymore, is how I would expect the Cardinals. And I think a lot of people get all excited about the possibilities, and I think the possibilities are actually pretty slim, but that's me. But
yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at too. I mean, sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to say, I think that's fair, but it raises the question of where the money is going to be spent.
Sure.
Right. Well, and that's the thing with the shortstop market. I mean, I thought if they were ever going to be in the shortstop market, it would have been last offseason.
Right.
Trey Turner, Corey Seager, Carlos Correa, again, some of those big names. But it seemed like pretty early on, especially when Corey Seager got the deal that he got, they weren't going to be in that market at all. But it is intriguing. And, I know Gould and others have wrote about, I think I've even seen Derek Gould, say like, why wouldn't you go after Trey Turner?
Sure.
Like, go after the bat, like go after the good bat and then let the rest take care of itself. And I do think Turner is really intriguing just for the fact that he's a guy that can play second. He's a guy that can play center field, which now, the Cardinals, I'm sure we can get into the outfield question, but they've got some questions now in outfield and some competition to be had out there, maybe a free agent to be signed. But it's going to be, I was thinking about that with the payroll specifically going up, because we talked about that. Well, how would payroll go up, especially at catcher? Because I know that was one thing that Mo said, like, we will be going outside the organization to get a catcher, which I think it made us happy to hear that. I imagine it made most Cardinals fans happy to hear that. But the only way I see the payroll going up in that form is if either you go sign Wilson Contreras to probably he's going to want a 4 or 5 year deal, I would imagine, to some degree, or you go trade for a guy like Salvador Perez is more of a stopgap. And I know his contract somewhere in the 20 to 22 million range if they wanted to go get somebody like that. But what are your thoughts on catcher? What do you think the Cardinals go do? Do you think, because we've read, and I know that there's been some talk, it's been reported that Wilson Contreras has talked to like Jose Quintana, who he's good friends with, about the culture, and he's going to talk to Yachty this offseason, and they're good friends. Do you think that that's a real possibility for the Cardinals?
It's so hard to say, in part because the idea of being that active in the free agent market is very unlike the Cardinals in general, right? And so it's hard for me to say what kind of free agent would or would not fit what they want, just because they have not really traditionally been that active in that market. The largest free agent deal they've ever passed out as an organization is still the deal they gave Dexter Fowler. So that's a sub $100 million deal by a pretty good chunk.
Right.
And so
you're talking free agency signing, right?
Right. Yeah. Free agent deal. Technically, the largest deal they've signed, anyone who hadn't previously been played for the Cardinals, was Paul Goldschmidt, but that was an extension. All that stuff. The largest free agent deal they've ever signed is still the Fowler deal. And so I I don't know. Like I have a hard time and have not really been able to dig up anything that tells me that they are really interested in Contreras in as much as they value defense so much behind the plate that it's Contreras is a fine defensive catcher. He really is, given especially I think the state of catching in the game right now in general. I don't know that he fits that bill, and I especially don't know that he fits that bill 3 or 5 years from now. Now, maybe they would say they don't care because they still believe in Herrera, but I, I, I have a hard time with Contreras being a guy, to me, that makes a lot of sense for them in free agency, other than that's a guy who is definitely going to cost money.
Sure.
And if they're going to spend money, then great. Because the other consideration there is what happens if the market for Contreras, what if Contreras is this year's Correa? Right? Like, what if it gets to be January, February, and Wilson Contreras is staring down the barrel of, oh, well, I can take 5 and 100 from whatever the Marlins, or I can take 1 and 20 from a competitive team and see what I can spin it up into next offseason. Maybe that to me is a market where they're more likely to get involved. But at the same time, if they reach January, February, and the top two catchers on the depth chart are still Andrew Kisner and Ivan Herrera, then somebody messed up somewhere.
Yeah, so I'll use that as part of this question that came in from somebody who's, what do you think is more likely to happen? The Cardinals sign Contreras or trade for a Murphy, Jensen, or Kirk? I think Murphy is the one that we've heard a lot about. Everyone has been talking about for sure.
I know you wrote about him recently too. I think you might have mentioned him in that payroll story you wrote. Yeah.
Yeah. Sean Murphy just screams classic Cardinals guy that they would go get. Everything about him seems to check every box. And it's not like, it's very easy to see the fit with Oakland as well. When you talk about a team that's got two catchers in the very top of their prospect pipeline, and Murphy entering his first year of ARB, and are the A's going to be eager to pay that out? The fit there definitely makes a lot of sense. The other guys, I don't think that Toronto is likely to trade Alejandro Kirk. I especially don't think that, I guess put it this way. If Toronto is trading Alejandro Kirk, it's because they don't think he can catch, which doesn't make him super useful for the Cardinals, right? Danny Jansen, though, is a guy who I would definitely have on my list as an interesting possibility. Now, Jansen maybe fits more in that 1A, 1B, where you're talking about him and Kisner with like a 90-70 game split. Traditionally, that's been more of what he is. And, do the Cardinals view him as a 110, 120 game catcher? I don't know. I'd be surprised, but maybe. I mean, he's got a lot of pop and who is well regarded defensively. And again, you look around the league for teams that have extra catchers. Well, Toronto's got 3. And they have 3 that they seem to like a lot. But of those, Jansen would seem to be the guy who is the odd man out there. So that's a name to keep in mind. The other name that I think we keep in mind, in terms of Salvador Perez, I spoke with somebody in Kansas City earlier this week, and when I asked if that was realistic, I guess the answer I got was possible, but super unlikely. Like the idea that Salvi would be traded, especially given kind of where they're at in terms of a transition. Not only, with the front office and with the manager, but also the Royals are about to come knocking for a bunch of public money for a new ballpark in the next 2 or 3 years. And what helps with that and what smooths that over with the public is to have like notable friendly faces on the team out stumping for you. And there's larger stuff at play for the Royals over the next couple of years than just winning baseball games. And people in Kansas City love Salvador Perez. So to dump him, that is an external factor that I think plays into this. But the other guy that I was going to mention is a guy who was this year, which is Mitch. That's a guy who probably Texas isn't going to have a lot of room for. 1 year left before free agency. Showed a lot of power when he was with the Twins. Again, as a guy who was well regarded defensively, but as he's aged, as he's gotten more hurt, there's definitely a lot more risk there. I don't know if you can trade for Mitch Garver again and count on him to catch 110 games. But that's someone who I would also maybe have an eye on the trade market.
And that question comes in from, it says Facebook user on there for some reason, but it's Michael Berry. Michael Berry is probably in our group that we have. We have a private group that has conversations in it, and that
blocking the name there.
Yeah, it's blocking the name because of that. So
that makes sense though with Salvador Perez. Now that I think about it, because my first thought with that was, well, they traded with Merrifield. They just fired Matheny. There's a big transition. Maybe they're going to start kind of blowing it up. But he is like like you think of the
He's
Royals, you
face.
think of Salvador
Absolutely.
Perez in the
Right.
same way that the Reds held on to Joey Votto, right? To have that guy
Exactly.
still there. That makes way more sense when you think about it. Danny Jansen really wasn't a name that I knew much of, but just looking at him last year, I mean, yeah, he only played 72 games. He hit 15 home runs and slugged over 500. That sounds great to me.
I don't know it depends on his defensive metrics,
Well,
right?
yeah, I
That's
don't know
more,
anything defensively, but
that's more
Jeff,
what
sounds like he's comparable there.
right, because it sounds like
Well,
that's
and
what
I think,
Mo's MO is.
and
Go ahead.
and with Jansen too. I mean, and to be honest, off the top of my head, I can't tell you how he measures up in most of the advanced stuff, but I know that with the Blue Jays, that was the guy they kind of went to settle down the staff and demand as a pitching staff, right? Because both Kirk and Moreno are kind of bat first, and so Jansen was the guy they sort of leaned on in that role. So he at least has experience with it, and I think would be fine. The challenge for Cardinal fans is going to be watching games over the next year, 2, 3 years, and looking for Yadier Molina. That is not going to exist because that kind of catcher just doesn't exist, right? Like it's gonna
Right.
change. It's been 20 years of having probably the best defensive catcher in the history of baseball behind the plate. That's going to be different, right? It's not going to look the same. And so at some point, good enough is going to have to be good enough.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I think there's a general excitement too, the thought of maybe getting a catcher that can still be good or above average defensively, but bring you some pop. Because I mean,
Absolutely.
we hadn't had that. Yachty hasn't been that guy. He had maybe a couple times where he was around 20 home runs or something.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation as the offseason goes on.
It gives you another
I
spot to be able to
believe,
have pop.
yeah. I think there's only been one non-Yadier Molina catcher who has hit at least 10 home runs for the Cardinals in the last, I want to say it was since like 92. I think Tom Pagnozzi hit 10 in 92. Matt Wieters cranked out 10 the
Yeah.
first year he was here. And other than that, there's no other Cardinal catcher has hit 10 home runs here in the last 20 years other than Yadier Molina. So a little pop would be something new for sure.
Absolutely. Well, and we've got tons of questions coming in, but I want to think about that trade a little bit more. The Murphy or any of the other ones, what is it going to take? What are we thinking? I mean, hear a lot of Nolan Gorman thrown around and things and people like that. We talked about Yepes and Newt Bar. Like, what does a package really look like on a realistic level?
I think Gorman is an interesting name, and part of the reason I think you see him get thrown around a lot is that he's a guy who is perceived to have a lot of value, and also a guy who Cardinal fans watched strike out a bunch and get sent down at the end of the season. Like the season did not necessarily end. He did have the last RBI of the year, as it turns out, but the season did not necessarily end on the kind of high note people may have hoped for Nolan Gorman, right? If you remember back at the start of last season, there was a lot of chic people. Nolan Gorman actually is a under the radar candidate for rookie of the year, and that clearly didn't happen, didn't really pan out. And he struggled for stretches, and so that makes him a guy that people wonder about. And frankly, the situation with Gorman ties to some extent into the situation with Wynn, which is with Gorman, with Edman, with Donovan, with Wynn coming up behind them. There are only so many spots at the end, especially with Arenado walking down third base in the next 5 years. So you can understand the reason why he would maybe fit what we think about when we think about trade bait. As far as the other guys like Yepes, Newt Bar, the problem with trying to trade guys like Yepes and Newt Bar is that most teams think they have that guy, right? The vast majority of teams think, you know what, we got a guy who hit pretty well in AAA that we think can be what Juan Yepes can be for the Cardinals. Newt Bar maybe is a little outside of that just because I think he established himself a little better as a hitter this year, showed maybe some more ceiling than folks thought he had, and is such an outstanding defensive player. I do think there is, there is maybe a little bit more from Newt Bar, but frankly, entering the winter, if the Cardinals are looking at an outfield, can they trade Lars Newt Bar right now? Is he the outfielder in which you have the most faith entering next season? And if so, can you trade him for a catcher? You can, but you better be pretty damn sure that Dylan Carlson's going to figure it out, right? And
Absolutely.
And look, they probably have to be pretty sure about that anyway. But if you're going to make that trade, you have to be really, really sure. And I'm not quite sure how you get there this winter. So that's a long way around to saying, what does a trade package look like realistically for Sean Murphy? Sure, it could include Nolan Gorman. That's a realistic possibility. Could it include some of the surplus pitching that maybe other teams could, like Dakota Hudson, for example, or Jake Woodford? Are those guys as valuable to the Cardinals as pitchers as they might be as trade pieces? And is Dakota Hudson as valuable to the Cardinals as their number 6 starter as he would be to Oakland as their number 2? Right. That's an interesting question and a fit that could work. I know everyone hates to trade pitching because you always need more pitching, which is always correct. But if those are the bullets that you have this winter, that's maybe where I would look.
Man, if you're telling me, I'd much rather trade Dakota Hudson and Jake Woodford for Sean Murphy than
Oh,
than
oh,
Nolan
yeah.
Gorman.
No, I'm talking about
and that's just an example.
Gorman
Pieces.
and one of those guys.
Well,
right?
sure.
Yeah,
Right. And it's going to take several. And that's what I was going to say with the A's. You have to think they're going to be asking for young, cost-controlled
right.
pitching. They just traded Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas.
Right.
They're going to be needing some pitching. I would imagine guys like Tink Hintz, Gordon Graceffo, guys like that are. I would be surprised if the Cardinals, especially Tink Hintz, from what I've read about him, would be very surprised if they want to throw a name like that around that young. But it'll be interesting.
But for instance, if Oakland starts asking about Hintz and Graceffo, can the Cardinals say, "Well, no, thank you, but can we interest you in the gently used Michael McGreevy?" Right?
Yeah.
They do have the kind of depth in the organization to where they can piece together some similar deals, and that ultimately, not to tie it all the way back to the trade deadline, but when the Juan Soto trade happened and all this conversation happened, well, the Cardinals weren't going to trade Carlson and they weren't going to trade Gorman. That's not what happened. The conversation was once they knew the Soto deal wasn't happening, then they were able to go to those guys and say, hey, you're not being traded. But more to the point, San Diego had pitching to offer that the Cardinals did not, right? Mackenzie Gore, there is not a Mackenzie Gore equivalent in the Cardinals system, unless you want to say Liberatore, who the Nats were not interested in. That was a non-starter for Washington. So that being the case, like that piece just didn't exist for the Cardinals. But when you get to this winter, you have a full year of Graceffo and a full year of Hintz and some other depth in the system. Maybe you don't have pitchers that you can trade for Juan Soto, but you probably do have pitchers you can trade for Sean Murphy and still come out okay on the other side.
And still get a guy that you're going to have, three more years of arbitration before he's a free agent.
Yeah, and I was listening to the radio today, and they talked about guys of Gorman's age. I'm just real high on Gorman, of the possibilities that 30 home runs a season type guy, that pop that we really need from a left-handed bat. But guys at his age, there were 2 that outperformed him at that age right now.
Right.
And that was Julio Rodriguez and Michael Harris.
Right.
Those are the only 2 guys that outplayed his statistics last year in that same age group. And so it's like, if we can do anything but that, I'd rather give up some guy that hasn't made it up to the big leagues in the pitching side than Nolan Gorman, who hopefully hits 30 home runs.
And I think too with Gorman, there is a degree of prospect fatigue, right? That's not fair, but it does happen to guys who've been in the system for a long time, with fans who are going, well, I've been hearing about this guy for forever, and he struck out a bunch this year, so that's enough. He must think trade him. He's 22, right? You heard about him because you drafted him. He was a high school senior. And he's just now getting to the age where you might expect him to be a productive big leaguer. And by the way, he hit whatever it was, 18 homers in the majors this season as a 22-year-old.
Yeah. I want to switch gears a little bit
to
the outfield. If you've got a little bit more time, Jeff, we don't want to keep you too on past what you need to. But we've talked about this, and obviously the big name is Aaron Judge. And we don't really have to spend any time on that conversation because that's not going to happen for the Cardinals.
I don't think so.
It's not going to happen. So I've told Ryan, I mean, given how the rest of the outfield went the rest of the year once Harrison Bader was traded, this really seems like this spring training is going to be a lot bigger, I think, than people think for Jordan Walker. It is what I think. I think he's really, and I know Mo I know you guys had the presser with him a couple of days ago, and he tried to temper expectations with that, but also seemed like he was like, I mean, yeah, he's going to get a look. And obviously he tore it up all year. He's tearing it up in the AFL right now. I keep telling Ryan, it would not surprise me if we had ourselves a Jordan Hicks type situation several years ago where the guy didn't play one game in AAA because they were so just blown away in spring training by what he was doing and had a need. They had a need for a power reliever that year. They needed a guy like that. There's a very, obvious need in the outfield for a slugger. I know it's different And we've talked about that between a pitcher and a hitter. There's difference, obviously, in terms of the struggle that there might be for Walker jumping straight to the major league level like that. But do you think he's going to get a real look this offseason for the outfield?
So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the concept of spring training survivor, but this is a thing that this popped up among writers for years and years and years, where it's who's going to be the last guy who appears in every single spring training game. I believe it was Juan Yepes this year. It might have been Brendan Donovan, but it was one of those two guys who every single day they were out there taking at bats and they were getting their shot at it. I think there's a real good chance that Jordan Walker is the guy who leads the Cardinals in at bats at spring training and who plays every single day at spring training until they see what they have or they see what they don't have. I think he is going to get every shot to make this team coming out of spring. Now, are there acquisitions that could change that? Sure. If they go on the market and they find two starting outfielders, then maybe things look a little different. But I think as of right now, he is going to get every opportunity to break camp with the club. And how could you not? How could you look at the year that he had and the way that that's continued through the AFL and not think that he is maybe your one of your best options in the outfield right now? And I do think they're going to be open to that. The next question I'm sure is going to be, from folks is going to be about service time manipulation. The Cardinals have really historically not done that. They have not been a club, but now maybe they haven't had a prospect of this caliber with which to do it in a long time, which is a fair point. But they really have not manipulated service time in that way. The one exception to that was Dylan Carlson in 2020. But, those were different circumstances. And I think given the nature of the COVID season, I think it was a little different in terms of how they were looking at when to call him up and when was the right time to make that decision. And so I don't know. Maybe I'm a sucker for believing it, but I think if Jordan Walker is their best or their second best outfield bat in spring, I think he breaks with them. And if you ask me today to bet on which way that goes, I would say it's more likely than not that he starts the year at AAA, but probably not by a lot, right? Call it 57-43 that he starts with Memphis and not with St. Louis.
Right. If he's on the roster opening day, that means the Cardinals have done nothing this offseason, right?
In the outfield.
Right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I necessarily with that because okay. I can definitely, for example, I can imagine a scenario where he is on the roster and Tyler O'Neill plays for someone else in spring, right? Like that is something I can imagine. I can imagine a scenario where the five outfielders on the roster to break camp are Carlson, O'Neill, Nootbaar, Walker, and Andrew Benintendi, right? I can imagine that, plus say Carlos Correa is playing shortstop, whatever, right? I can imagine a winter where they make some significant moves that maybe don't include outfielders, but that do improve the team in a meaningful way.
And
that's a good point.
I'll pop this on there. Gene wants to know, is there a leash on Dylan? Speaking of talking about outfielders, is there a leash of some sort? Like, obviously, I think Dylan gets a lot of the criticism right now is because of the non-Soto trade that then he got lumped into the now you're and then also trading Harrison Bader. Now you're the guy, right? And then he didn't perform the way that people had hoped down the stretch, and I think that's where he gets a lot of the criticism now in the last few months.
Well, I know Mo. I was going to say Mo told you. I mean, I thought I remember hearing in some of that presser the other day that he mentioned that they really thought the wrist problem that he had hampered him the rest of the year. I know right after the Bader trade happened, he was actually rehabbing in AAA. He was supposed to get 2 more games and had to come right back. I think he only got maybe 1 game, a rehab game before he jumped back in. It just didn't seem like he had enough time to get back ready. And obviously, the injury just sapped it. And we've had a lot of conversation too, really, with him and Tommy Edman. And should they just both bat right-handed for good? I don't know. I mean, it just seems like all the pop is on that side. Now, Tommy picked it up later, but man, Dylan's really struggled from the left side of the plate.
It's funny. Probably the most, right way to put this, blunt, curt. I don't know. I've ever heard Dylan Carlson be with somebody in the clubhouse. There was a day deep into the summer, late August, something like that, where someone did ask Dylan that directly. Hey, have you thought about just hitting right-handed? And Dylan was kind of like, what Dylan said was, I've never seen a breaking ball from a right-handed batter's box. I can't do that in the middle of the season. It was just a flat like
that makes
it,
sense.
it was just a flat no. Right? He's never done it in his life. Seen a breaking ball from that batter's box from a righty, so I get it.
That's a fair point.
In terms
Yeah,
of,
no kidding.
right. In terms of what there are two ways to look at this, right? Number one, you're right about the injury. I do think that there was a lot of power and strength that got sapped out of the wrist, the thumb, and it definitely impacted him throughout the season. The Cardinals were aware that he was hurt. He was getting treatment. They knew where the injury was. At the same time, Dylan is a guy who is young and competitive and establishing himself in his career. And though it's not always easy for guys like that to say, I can't go today. Right. There's a difference between the team knowing that he's hurt and in much the same way that players, as they mature, learn the difference between hurt and injured. Sometimes that goes the other way, right? Where a guy who's so competitive can think that he's hurt when he is injured. And that really changes the way that he's able to perform. The flip side of this, though, is that, for the last 2 months of the season, Dylan Carlson was a strict platoon player. He didn't play against righties, right? He was only in the lineup against lefties, and he was way down the lineup in those cases. So, in terms of is there a quote unquote leash on Dylan Carlson? Yeah, and we saw it last year. We saw him get turned into a platoon guy down the stretch. That's why you saw Tyler O'Neill playing center field. That's why you saw a lot of stuff that you saw at the end of the year last year after the Bader trade, because they recognized what they weren't going to get out of Dylan from the left side of the plate, and they adjusted accordingly.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's interested me too, watching Walker the last month or so in AAA and in the AFL. He's playing a lot of center field.
Absolutely, yeah.
He's playing a lot of center field. And maybe how Dylan Carlson comes out in spring training, injury, no injury, hitting well, not hitting well, maybe that factors into Walker being on the roster as well. It wouldn't surprise me.
It might. The one thing I would say about Jordan Walker playing a lot of center is that if you're going to adjust a guy into the outfield, especially a guy like Walker who's played at third, the biggest adjustment for him is going to be that ball dead on, right? Is going to be that center field angle. And so it makes sense to me that they would have him play as part of that adjustment, because that's going to be the toughest adjustment to make. So if you start there and Walker can get comfortable and be passable in center, then you can put him in the corners with a lot of comfort. He's played a lot of right field in here in the AFL. And that, if I had to guess, that probably is where he ends up in the long term.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, and that makes sense. That's a good point in center field. We've heard Bader and Edmonds and others talk about that the ball hit straight to you is one of the hardest plays to make, because the judgment and the way you have to judge the ball coming. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So, Jeff, I want to know what you think of the most likely to happen is, signing an outfielder with a good chunk of money, a shortstop with a big chunk of money, or signing a big chunk of money to the catcher, like a Contreras type, not trade-wise, but an actual free agent signing. What's the most likely of those options?
Of those, I would say the most likely is stop, if only because I don't see an outfielder or a catcher on the free agent market that fits what they do and what they would want, right? Like I have a really hard time imagining them having learned the lessons they learned from Dexter Fowler, going, yes, Brandon Nimmo, that's a guy we're going to give a lot of money
Yeah.
to. That
Pass.
That seems like the same deal to me, and I would imagine It seems like the same deal to them as well. So that probably doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The catcher stuff, I'll believe Contreras when I see it. That would definitely be an exciting move, an energizing move, and it's a move that makes a lot of sense for them for a lot of reasons. But there are also reasons why it doesn't make a lot of sense, and I don't know. I struggle with it, and I try though I might have not been able to find a lot of linkage between them outside of Contreras wanting play. I think it's clear that when Wilson Contreras looks around at where he might want to play, that St. Louis is pretty near the top of his list. Whether he's at the top of the Cardinals list is a different conversation.
And also, I guess I didn't put in that would be pitchers as well. I mean,
I was about to say,
is there a high-end, top-end starter that the Cardinals are going to sign? I mean, obviously, Mo said, this is the first October that he can remember having his 5 starters ready to go for next season. But that there was still room to grow in the starter spot, and what he said in the press conference.
I mean, I don't know, Jeff, if you've had I don't know how much we've still got the World Series going on, so there's still a little bit of time for the offseason comes, but The one name that stands out to me, and the name honestly that I wanted last offseason, was Carlos Rodon. And I think that's one guy that seems like strikeout, he's got the strikeout potential well over 200 this year. I think he's second or third in the NL in strikeouts, if not up there. Coming off, a player option deal. He's a guy for me that they need to target, especially now knowing that this is Wainwright's last season.
Right.
Flaherty, I think, after next year, is he a free agent after next season? Is that right?
Flaherty and Montgomery both, yeah.
Yeah, and so, I mean, those are three big guys that potentially Wainwright, for sure you're losing. Montgomery wouldn't surprise me if they gave him some sort of extension if he does well.
And actually,
this year.
and Michaelis too. Michaelis also is a free agent.
That's right.
Wow.
So I mean,
yeah. And you don't really like Dakota Hudson, right? And Matz is on there for how many? 2 years, right? I mean,
we got Matz for 4 more years or 3 more years, I think, right?
3 more.
The one that's gonna. Yeah. He's the one that's on there the longest. Is Matz.
Yeah. Yeah, they need to go get pitching this offseason. The tough thing is, unless the payroll going up is going to be everything being thrown at Jacob deGrom, which I don't think it is. The pitching's kind of thin. I mean, Verlander, Rodon, Chris Bassett, maybe. I mean, there's not a lot of guys that interest me past Rodon.
Rodon is the guy. If you told me today the Cardinals are going to spend $100 million on a free agent this winter, but I'm not going to tell you who, Rodon would be the guy that I would guess, because I agree that he fits very clearly what they need. And the question with him was never performance; it was always health. And so if you feel comfortable with that, if you're okay with where he's at health wise, which it's a free agent pitcher, so you roll the dice and you hope that you're right, then that's one that fits, because Rodon is also a guy who at the deadline, if the Giants had been in a spot where they were going to move him, the Cardinals would have been right at the front of that line. So he's definitely a guy who they have had interest in the past, and who definitely fits a lot of what makes sense for them. Now, the caveat I would have here is I'll be very interested to see what they do with the pitching coach staff and how that develops. I think everybody around here is expecting Dusty Blake to end up as the pitching coach. And if that is the case, then I'll be very interested to see the kind of pitchers that Dusty gets invested in and involved in, and the way that his influence sort of changes the way they pursue pitchers in the market. Because Rodon, as a guy who spins the hell out of the ball and who definitely has swing and miss, checks some boxes that we heard frequently from the manager this summer. We need more spin and miss. We need more swing and miss, and we like guys who spin it. That was stuff that we heard a lot. Rodon checks those boxes. And so if they think that he's healthy, that's a guy who makes a whole lot of sense for me. And then if you want to talk about what trades look like this winter, then let's have a conversation about Jordan Montgomery. Let's have a conversation about Jack Flaherty. And do you improve in 2 spots by paying Rodon and trading from your starter, quote unquote surplus? You get a lot more for Jack Flaherty or Jordan Montgomery than you get for Dakota Hudson.
Right.
And is that a way you improve your team this winter?
Yeah. Well, look, Ryan and I have talked about it. I mean, the biggest way you can improve the team this winter is just go trade for Shohei Ohtani.
Right. I said that last year, in the middle of the season. Right. Well, now I'm listening, and Jeff gets me excited. I'm like, there's no way they're going to sign a shortstop. Maybe. There's no way they're going to sign a big top-end starter. Rodon, I like him. If you told me anybody, he says $100 million to Rodon. Now I'm excited that we're going to sign somebody, and I'm not tampering my expectations. Now Jeff's got me excited and on board.
If they're not going to spend a bunch of money on a free agent, then I'm going to be really interested to see who they trade for. And it's going to be a lot of fun to cover Mike Trout next season, because I don't know where else the money's coming from. So,
well, I was going to say, like, whenever he says payroll is going up, what do you guys...
And he said that like 3 times, right? He was pretty adamant about that.
Yeah.
And he said, it is fact, it's going up. So what does that mean? Does that mean $5 million? Like, how did you interpret what he really meant by that? Because it can go up, $1 million and it went up, and he's right. But like, what does it really mean?
So sure. I think that the timing here matters, because we had that conversation with Mo. Today's Wednesday. I think it was a week ago today. Had that conversation, I believe, on a Wednesday. Maybe it was Thursday, whatever it was. But it was right after he came back from California, where he'd met with Nolan and sort of laid out what the plan was going to look like. And, when he's speaking to us there, he's obviously speaking hands, but he also knows that the audience includes players, includes people in the organization. And so if he just had a conversation with Nolan Arenado where, for argument's sake, he laid out, we're going to increase payroll by X amount this season, and here's kind of what we're prioritizing, it behooves him to say the same thing to us with emphasis. And so when he says the payroll is going to climb this year, I think it's interesting. And the number that I've thrown around that they have to play with, if they were to increase the payroll by 10%, say from 170 to 187, 190, if you want to be crazy, that gives them like $60 million to play with this winter.
Yeah, that's a lot for the Cardinals.
That's a lot, and that's not a crazy increase. That takes into account the offset they're getting from Colorado. That takes into account the deferment with Adam Wainwright. That takes into account you're dropping off the buyouts to Carpenter and Carlos Martinez. Now, are there things they're going to have to do to nip into that? Because that number that I've written about a couple times, that includes the arbitration raises, the expected arbitration raises. It doesn't, it also assumes a couple non-tenders. Alex Reyes, for example, I think we expect to be non-tendered. Chris Stratton, third-year arb, and he's going to be making, I think, MLB trade rumors estimated like $3.5 million. Stratton was fine. You can get a seventh-inning guy for teams that you're down to for less than $3.5 million. I think there probably are better ways to spend that money. There are things they can do internally, though, that would take up a chunk. For example, if they just decided it's time to bite the bullet and eat Paul DeJong, that's like $15 million. It's $9 million in salary plus the buyouts of the two options.
Right.
That's a lot. And that would be, and that would be all at once, and that would definitely be a chunk of it. So maybe that's one way that they spend some of that money, which I'm sure would not be very exciting for fans, but that definitely would count in that. But even still, like, that would still give them $40 million to play with in the market, right? They could do all of this stuff. They could release Paul DeJong and eat every nickel of his deal, and still have like $40 million to play with in trade and free agency, which is a lot, right? That's Contreras plus a whole bunch of other stuff, or that's Rodon plus Murphy plus Benintendi. There's a lot they can do with that money.
Talk dirty to me. That sounds good.
That is encouraging. And I mean, that's what stood out to me the most with Mo. And I was telling Ryan, Jeff, I used to blog with Fansided several years ago, and the Cardinals, I mean, it's been a handful of years, maybe a little bit longer. They've done like a blogger day where they've invited some of the blogger guys to come out, and they finally brought that back this year after the last couple of seasons with COVID and everything. And so, part of that is we get like a 30-minute. It's a nice Q&A with Mo. And this one this year, I don't remember him being as candid and transparent as he was in some of it, especially with us. We're not like the legit media guys like you guys. He seems like he's
going to get better answers than we are.
Well, yeah, that I guess he does get to be a little bit more candid in that atmosphere. But it surprised me. But it seemed like that in this press conference. I mean,
Similar demeanor.
Yeah, just the transparency. He's never said anything like that about payroll. He's never been that transparent about, we're going to get a catcher. It's just always been like, we'll fill in the gaps. And it seems encouraging as fans, on the fan side, that there was that much transparency. So, and maybe that is the Arenado thing. Maybe that is the conversation they had, and he knows, like you said, he knows those guys are watching.
And I think part of it too is that, look, Mo went out of his way to say he was so excited at how well the fans have supported the team over the last year, and that's going to be great for them, and they're going to be able to turn that into payroll. Realistic, I mean, that's true, but it's also true that they acted really conservatively through COVID and probably found themselves in much better economic shape than they thought, than their worst projections were coming out on the other side of this thing. And so now they feel like they can be a little more aggressive because if the DeWitts have been anything in their stewardship of the Cardinals, it is risk averse. Maybe is the way that I would phrase it, which is not necessarily a vice, but it is, I think, a fair way to describe the way that they have operated the baseball team. And so, if coming out on the other side of the pandemic, the finances look a lot better than they thought that they might, then that also gives them some of that breathing room and kind of dovetails at this moment here.
I have maybe a question that doesn't. It pertains to this money part, and I don't know. You may not have an answer for it, and that's fine. Has the conversation of Valley Sports and the money and the issues, the bankruptcy, all the stuff that has been going on, the conversations of Valley Sports, does that have any effect right now on conversations of, like you talked about, they did their money really well during COVID. They've come out the side a little better. But if something would happen that some of the articles have talked about, there'd be a loss of revenue considerably for the Cardinals and other teams, and on all the sports, NBA, NHL, there'd be a huge changing of money, and I'd wonder if that scares some of these clubs.
So I've thought about this, and when I've tried to ask about it, I have not gotten really satisfactory answers. In part because the Cardinals aren't looking to fan this particular flame, because
Sure.
I do think it's on their minds. The thing that I would say about this, and in fact, there was a story just this week about the revenue that the Cubs generated through Marquee, and that revenue, I want to say the Cubs generated, I think the story said $90 million through Marquee over the last year, compared to the 50 that an average MLB team is generating out of their TV deal. So the Cubs ended up much better off. Now that's a different media market,
Sure.
and the price of that changes. But the short answer, I guess, to this question is, I think the Cardinals think that if they found themselves in a situation where they had to operate the RSN themselves, they would probably do fine, because whatever they would lose in rights fees, they probably would make up a whole lot on the back end in terms of like the ad revenue and everything else that generates profit for Bally's. So I do think that people are anticipating some kind of change happening there, whether it's next year, whether it's in 3 years. It's really not clear. I do think that they are probably well positioned to take advantage of that when and if it happens.
Cool. I didn't think you'd really have an answer, but I appreciate that answer. Do you have, Josh? You have anything else? I mean, he's given us almost an hour, so
Yeah. Thanks for the time, Jeff.
Yeah.
This is great.
No, of course. It's the off season. I got a ball game on the TV in here, so I'm.
So do we.
We've got it on as well.
Well,
Yep.
Tell
Yeah.
us where people can find you, where they can read your stories.
Yeah.
Give everyone that plug, so now they know a little bit about you, and now they can read your stuff, and best way to find you and everything like that.
Yeah, pages of the Belleville News-Democrat. So that's on your newsstands in the Illinois side or at bnd.com. And then you can find me on Twitter. It's at JMJones.
Awesome. Well, look, we say, once we've had you guys on here, you're a friend of the podcast. So,
Yeah.
so
We'll
when
take
the Cardinals go out and trade for Sean Murphy, we'll have you back on for some reaction.
Look, if they do it during the winter meetings, you can have me back on 7 or 8 cocktails deep trying to write stories.
There we go.
Everybody else is. So
Hey, that makes for a great live podcast.
Absolutely.
it makes for something.
All right, Jeff. We appreciate it. Thanks. Tell your mom hi. We appreciate her.
Will
Appreciate
do.
her as well.
Thanks,
so
man.
much.
Yeah, anytime, guys. Have a good one.
I'd see you. All right, well, that was Jeff Jones with the Belleville Democrat, and he also writes for MLB.com. He's also part of the Baseball Writers of America.
Yeah.
So I guess that means he gets a vote for Hall of Fame. We even talk
I
about
think
that.
it does. Yeah.
Yeah, so we didn't really talk about that, but man, he gave us an hour, and wow,
A lot of great nuggets in there. We're gonna have to clip some of that.
lots of clipping going
Yeah.
on. We had so many questions come in. We didn't get to all of them.
Well,
but-
I was looking. I mean, we kind of hit some of these chances.
Yeah.
We signed a top flight ace. We talked a little bit about. Look,
we touched on the points. Yeah, for sure.
I'll tell you, just instant reaction to that. His thoughts on Carlos Rodon gets me really excited.
Man, he gets me. Look, I said this a little bit. I think there's a lot of people that push stories,
Right.
agendas to be able to create buzz for the offseason, right? Or gives them something to talk about on the radio, right? And I'm not a big fan of that, because usually what happens in the St. Louis Cardinals is we're going to all get excited and nothing's going to happen. And then Jeff then reiterates, well, if it's going to be outfield, shortstop, or catcher, it's probably going to be a shortstop. Then I'm like, oh, hell. Well, now we're just going to start back over of what my
Hop on
thoughts
the
were.
train.
Yeah, hop on the train. And then and he's like, yeah, let's get Rodon makes the most sense for the Cardinals. $100 million is where, if you told, his quote was, if you said, where do you think a big signing happens? He says it's a pitcher, and it's Carlos Rodon.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he said if you told me the Cardinals
Right.
signed somebody for 5 years and $100 million, I would guess Carlos Rodon.
Right.
And it is a little. And I know the criticism that might come out is, well, how do you know he's not Steven Matz? And that's a fair point. Like, he's had his injuries throughout his career, comparable in terms of the innings pitched as Matz. But the difference is when he's healthy, he's like really good.
Right.
And he's
And he's
always
swinging
had the
miss- swing
strikeout.
and miss stuff, which
He's
is
always had that.
Right.
He's always had that. But now, at the end of the day, he's never pitched more than 178 innings. and that was this year. That's a career high for him. His second season in the majors in 2016, he pitched 165 innings. It was 178 this year. I don't know if maybe he missed a couple starts, or maybe they just were, being a little careful with his innings, especially towards the end there when the Giants were out of it and everything. But man, he's a guy that's thrown a no-hitter. He did that with the White Sox 2021 and 237 strikeouts in 178 innings. If he's a guy that could stay healthy for you
Right.
over the course of those 4 or 5 years, I mean, that's just look, we're sitting here watching the Phillies and the Astros in the World Series, and what have we talked about? Well, someone said to me, well, why do you think the Phillies made it all the way? Well, they've got way more than 2 sluggers
Yes.
to back up a lineup, one, and they have 2 like legit co-aces on the mound, and both of them have strikeout stuff. Those are the 2 things that we're lacking. And, I mean, just at the end of the day, that's where it's at. That's where we're at. We're lacking 2 more like high impact power bats.
Yes.
And at least one ace, at least one guy that's got swing and miss stuff.
I mean, I think the Cardinals gave Philly all the juice because they weren't playing very well, to be honest. And then the
Cardinals beat themselves in that series.
They got excited. And they saw some success, and then they've been able to be successful. But the question is, like, they haven't done much different except there's 5 guys hitting, right? And the Cardinals couldn't get anyone to hit in the postseason.
Talking about the Phillies?
Yeah, Phillies had 5 guys to hit. Cardinals couldn't get anyone to hit in the postseason. And then obviously, 2 big starters. I mean, that's literally, if you look at the Astros,
same thing.
They have 3, probably 4 really good starters, and they have great pitching depth. And that's why both teams are there, is because of their pitching and their guys that can hit bombs and just professional hitters. The Cardinals only have a couple really good hitters all the time, except for the postseason. But
and his point, Jeff's points on payroll, even if they eat the DeYoung contract, 40, 45, 50 million still to play with, that's a lot.
Yeah, I never really thought about them eating the contract. Like, people have talked about it, like cutting him.
Like they did Fowler a year or 2 ago.
Someone even mentioned in one of the comments, I don't remember where it was, will Paul DeYoung be on the spring training roster? Like, will he be reporting as a Cardinal? And I thought that's always going to be a yes. But when you hear that, if they think that payroll is going to go up and what he thinks that means, 10%, then they can eat that and move on. I also think they got to be exploring every opportunity to dump that and receive something back. Like in Fowler, when we looked at that deal, they dumped him.
He wasn't in spring training,
and all they got back was money. It was as a player to be named later, and there was no player. It was just cash considerations later.
Right, and even if you find somebody to take him and kick you back $1 million, I don't know if they would do that, but like just anything to help.
But I'd rather have a freaking AA guy as a possibility to get something than $1 million. I mean,
maybe
as a team.
I mean, I don't know how often those throw in things, but look, Juan Yepes was a throw in the Matt Adams trade.
Absolutely.
And it took 3 or 4 years, but I mean, you never know.
Right.
I mean, you never know who you might get back in those.
I'd rather have that than some money to offset it, because you can get them into your system and your team and your all that, and you can be able to get them to be able to hopefully be successful. That's why I look at it.
Yeah. Moises Gomez.
Well, they have to put him on the 40-man, right?
They do, and I think that they better. He's a guy that I was looking up on him. Did you know we got him? The Rays. I think he was in the Rule 5 draft. They let him go. He wasn't doing anything in that organization. They let him go, and we snagged him, and he figured something out.
Yeah, we didn't ask Jeff about that. There's 4. They opened up 4 spots on the 40-man.
Well, Yachty and Albert, are they considered 2 of those 4, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Yachty, Albert. They outrighted Kramer Robinson.
Yes.
And
I think he's been outrighted before.
A few times. And there's one more that they did. I
can't remember the 4th. Yeah.
But
I did see that.
There's 4 spots open, but then there's also question marks of guys coming off IL that was on there. That could then jump back on. Verhagen being one of them, where that ends up, things like that. So I think
they have to get him on because he's got another deal or another year on his deal.
Right. So there's guys going to go back onto it as well, but there's still going to be a spot. It sounds like for Moises Gomez. Are they going to use that to be able to save him? Is a question that I don't know the answer to.
Well, look, if they're, Jeff said, I could see Tyler O'Neill not in spring training with the Cardinals. Yeah. So if that's something they go out and do and they package him, theoretically, let's say maybe the A's would be interested in him in a package, him along with others like pitching for Sean Murphy. that's an open spot to try out a Moises Gomez,
Absolutely.
or Alec Burleson a little more.
I'm really terrified of the outfield. Really,
yeah.
I'm really scared. So like
I'm scared defensively, honestly, more than anything right now.
To get rid of Tyler O'Neill or Nolan Gorman for that matter, two guys that you think that can hit a bunch of home runs, is like, oh please! As soon as they go, they're gonna go hit a bunch of home runs somewhere else.
O'Neill, you've seen it now.
Yes.
I mean, you've seen it for almost a full season. Like, if he plays 145, 50 games, he's hitting 45 bombs.
Right. And as soon as you trade them, they're going to. That's just what's going to happen.
That's always what happens. We watch it. We watch it every year.
Yeah. They're going to succeed somewhere else, and it's just going to be like, gosh, why couldn't we get that out of them or get them back on track? And we didn't really even talk about the pitching, the hitting coach opening.
The coach is big. We should have asked him, does he think that that's mainly going to be internal?
Yeah.
Or internal in the organization, or even just internally within the franchise, like maybe a Matt Holliday coming in as bench coach? Because I've been reading a lot about that. I know he and Ollie are really good friends.
Yeah.
Wouldn't surprise me to see Holliday as a bench coach. I don't know if he'd be the hitting coach. Wouldn't surprise me to see him as a bench coach.
Yeah, and he gave us the name for the pitching coach who he thinks it's
Blake,
going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I need to do more looking in on him and on.
I assume
him.
he's an internal option.
Yes, he's internal. So need to learn more about him because it sounds like he might be the future pitching coach. We need to learn everything we can.
Yeah.
What else you got? Anything? I mean, we're only an hour when this is a short one.
He was great. Yeah. We didn't get into Gold Gloves a lot. We could talk a little bit about that. I think we both, I'd imagine a lot of Cardinal Nation felt Tommy got snubbed. He should have gotten one of those.
I think Tommy could have won. Tommy Goldman.
Tommy Gold Glove.
Tommy Gold Glove should have won 3. He should have won one at shortstop. He should have won one at second base, and he should have won the utility. I think he was absolutely catastrophically snubbed. No offense to Brendan Donovan.
Yeah.
But I think it was just crazy that he didn't win any of them. And I think you could have made an argument why he should have, even though he wasn't nominated at shortstop, why he should have won at shortstop. And they even talked about on the broadcast that he played half the innings that the other guy did that won for it. But you know what? He had more defensive runs saved than the guy that he played half the innings for.
Yeah.
Like, they were penalizing him for doing that. Then it means like he was a perfect fit for the utility award. And now, did Brendan Donovan play more positions? Yes.
So Jeff had a good tweet about that.
Yeah.
I saw yesterday. He said Donovan was the only player in the MLB to make at least 5 starts at 6 different positions.
Right.
So you look at that in terms of like what is the utility?
Sure.
The Gold Glove supposed to be. And I was like, okay, I didn't realize that. I get that. He says he's the only player in MLB history to make his first 4 career starts at each of the 4 infield positions. That's kind of a fun little stat.
Right.
He's literally, played all over the place. And there was a good article I read today in the Post-Dispatch just about him. And apparently when he was, I think he said he went to school at college of South Alabama. But one of the things that like he struggled with was defense.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
And that was always the knock that he got from coaches. And he was like, I just went after it. I was just determined to be able to play everywhere so I could be in a lineup anytime. So kudos to him. It's awesome. Like, if it wasn't gonna be Tommy, I'm glad it's Brendan Donovan because he made a really good impact this year. And it wasn't just defensively. The guy had a 390 something on base percentage. Right. He was great for us. But yeah, it seems kind of crazy that Tommy didn't win one of those, especially at shortstop or second base, because he was so good defensively this year.
It was unbelievable.
His WAR was over 5, and I don't know exactly if you can even look at the breakdown of it, but I would imagine more than half of that 5 is from his defense.
It shows you the breakdown, and it's a lot. It's like 4 of the WAR is playing shortstop, because the shortstop gives you higher points than anywhere else in WAR. WAR is weighted by the position you defend.
Right.
So shortstop is the hardest position to defend according to WAR, and so that's why his WAR was so high, is because of how well he played shortstop. And then he wasn't even nominated at the shortstop position for Gold Glove. So I think there's a lot of gripe there. And then people were upset about Goldie not winning the Gold Glove, and his WAR defensively was negative. So I didn't know how they would look at that. Because he wasn't. He was good.
His defensive WAR.
He was good this year. Goldie was at first. He was very, very good, but he wasn't great like some of the other ones. And then you shared about Key Brian Hayes. The Pirates really wanted Key Brian Hayes to win third base.
Yeah, they had some fun memes going on. I wonder with him, because he did in the Pirates mentioned, like, he led, I think they said all third basemen, or maybe all of the NL in defensive runs saved.
Right.
Which is a pretty big stat in that. But I'm just curious I don't know if you remember, we started off. No, we didn't start off our season against them because those games got pushed back at the end of the year because of the lockout.
No, we did.
Oh, we still did.
The opening day was Key Brian Hayes was playing
but
third base.
That's right.
And he got hurt.
That's what I was going to say. He got hurt on the first game.
And the
so if
first
you remember,
game,
I wonder if part of it is, or part of the voting factoring or the analytics is how many games, because Nolan did play quite a bit more games than him, and so he had more defensive runs saved, which you would say, well, in that few games, like that's pretty impressive. But then the other end, like that's fewer games that you have to maybe make an error or miss a play or not get a play too. So it kind of goes both ways.
But I also think there's a level of plays that are made.
Yeah.
It's an outs above average type of stat of like
Nolan, his
plays,
of those are off the charts.
Right. And I'm sure Key Brian Hayes is a great defender, but the quality of like the plays that are made that should never be made are ones that Nolan Arenado makes. And and that's the difference. And I've got my Nolan jersey on today.
And it just feels like more like Goldie should have got it.
And you
just
got your
for
Nolan shirt on too.
I do, yeah. My Breaking T one. Let's put that.
Oh yeah,
down there.
BreakingT.com/that's-a-winner pod.
Flipped. Yes. I think so many plays we saw too, like the crazy ones that Nolan got to, and then the throws on the other end, like Goldie making some like really good picks this year. So that's what you think. And so I did think it was ironic. I saw that Christian Walker with the Diamondbacks won it, and I mean, he was a big reason why that they were okay with trading Goldschmidt to begin with. So I mean, good for him. You know, he's starting to pay off some dividends for them a little bit because he had a lot of power this year too for them.
Absolutely, and that's a big part. And I think next year we'll, going from 5 to 2 is like kind of gut-wrenching, right? For the Cardinals to go from 5 Gold Glovers to 2 is like, wait a second. And then you traded one of those guys who obviously, in Harrison Bader, that didn't play a ton for the Cardinals this year because of injuries. But you also get rid of arguably the best defensive outfielder in baseball. So this whole mantra of we're a defensive team is kind of looking like maybe not, because the outfield is looking questionable. Yeah. And then the middle infield, if we're talking about putting Gorman in the game, is like, okay, now Gorman played fine at second, but it's like we're lacking. And then obviously who plays catcher? Like Kisner's not winning a Gold Glove at catcher.
No.
You know what I mean?
The more I think about it, I think I do agree with Jeff. I mean, the Sean Murphy trade seems right up the Cardinals' alley of the thing. Because you're getting a guy who can hit. He's got it. Yeah, the cost is it. That's always what's going to be. I mean, that's why they weren't in on the trade market for Frankie Montas, because their ask was so high.
But I'm all about. Look, I understand Contreras, and Jeff didn't think he matched the Cardinals, and he would be shocked if Contreras comes. But if it's money for a short term, it's just money and not players, I'm all in on Wilson Contreras because of that.
Yeah,
because
I think he's good enough defensively. I know, Dan Dockage had told us he thought part of maybe why he wasn't traded was because of like some of the game calling defensive side kind of thing. But he's got a great arm. Obviously, he's one of the better hitting catchers in baseball. So it excites me to think about him. I think he'd be fine defensively. I don't know. I think it would take him talking to Yachty being able to maybe get DeWitt's ear to the idea. I do think if Yachty recommends him, that carries a lot of weight.
Sure.
I mean, it has to a degree.
But if they sign no one else in bat wise, you have to get Contreras over someone else, right?
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, look at it that way. If the Cardinals make no other moves that add a big bat,
he's. I mean, I would consider him impact bat.
Right.
I mean,
and Sean Murphy is good. He's a good defensive catcher.
If you want both, as I say, if you want both, like if you want the Gold Glove potential and the good hitter, it seems like Sean Murphy's that road to go down. And you want to save some money,
absolutely,
maybe to spend more on like. It would blow me away if we traded for Sean Murphy and then turn around and snag Carlos Correa on some like high AAV 2-3 year deal, and then made our big long-term signing Carlos Rodon.
Like
that is knock it out of the ballpark.
Absolutely.
I feel like we legit have a real chance in the playoffs.
Not only that, you would be like, wow, they made some signings in the offseason. So don't get your hopes up, because that rarely happens.
Oh, yeah. No, it very rarely happens. And it's not going to be an outfielder. I mean, I told you, I don't, if you're not going after Aaron Judge, which they aren't, I don't know why you would waste time spending money on Brandon Nimmo or Andrew Benintendi. Even he got hurt for
Right.
the end of the career. I was just those are light. Those guys remind me of Dexter Fowler. They're light hitting, light power outfielders that
We already
neither of
have.
them, yeah, we've had before, and they don't really stay healthy.
Right.
I mean, I don't see the point. I'd rather see Jordan Walker, or I'd rather see Alec Burleson and Moises Gomez, guys we haven't even seen yet. Let's see what they can do.
Right.
Than sign one of those guys for a year or two. So it's going to be interesting. I hope they do something. I mean, they got to do something.
GM meetings coming up next week, a week and a half, something like that. Katie Wu is going to join us after those GM meetings. We tried to get her this week, and her schedule was too full. So she's going to come on, I think, like
the GM meetings. That's before the winter meetings, right?
Correct. It's in November.
Okay, right.
It's
Winter meetings is always early December.
Yeah. So she said she'll come in after the GM meetings to have conversations. I want to talk more about her Q&A with Nolan Arenado. I want to talk to her more about Nolan Arenado and the opt-out and all those things that we've discussed early on in the podcast. And yeah, I mean, that's what I'm looking forward to in the next couple weeks. What else you got?
Not much else.
All right. Well, as always, That's a Winner podcast is you can go for breakingt.com/that's a winner pod for your t-shirts, hoodies, all those things for
Christmas coming up. Get some gifts.
Wear the moment is what they like to tell you. So like my Tommy Two Bags hoodie, my MV Goldie. Goldie will be announced as the MVP if it's Goldie on November 17th is when they will announce
It's not far away. A couple weeks.
The MVP. That whole week they do like Manager of the Year. Then the next day they do whatever. And then November 17th is announcing of MVPs. You're on our Twitter. You go to our Twitter. You retweet the pinned tweet up top.
Pinned right there at the top.
You are in play to win.
Follow, like, and retweet. Make sure you follow us. Yeah, you're not going to be in the drawing.
Yes. So what I'll do is there's a generator. It'll generate anyone that's retweeted us will get put into a pool. It'll generate and pull a winner. In that winner, if I go to your profile and you are not following this,
pull another name.
Following us, we will generate another. All right, so that's how you get it to be able to win the jersey. I think there's like 340, 350. You have like a 1 in 300 and some odd chance of winning a jersey. Paul
348 retweets right now.
So 1 in 348 right now to win a Paul Goldschmidt jersey. That's
more likes than retweets. Come on, all you had to do is hit one more button.
That's way more likely to win a jersey than it is to win the Powerball. All right.
Oh yeah. Way more.
Your odds are really, really good, okay? 1 in 348. That's pretty good chances to win a jersey. Right now, they could go up. And I bet if he's announced as the MVP, all of a sudden those might start jumping up a little quicker because I can't, like, turn it off.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, no, they would. They would. I would hope so. People would be dumb for them not to before.
Should we do the announcement that night? So if on November 17th, I
say give it a couple days. Might not be a bad thing. You know, let people get more of a chance.
We could do it live. We could do the thing live where it picks live. It's just an app.
Generator thing. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Okay, we might save
that for the winner. It wouldn't be fun for the other 300 people that didn't get
but
it.
we could get 300 people checking it out maybe to see if they're about to win.
That'd be great. Join us on that.
Yeah, I just came up with that. Sounds good. All right. BreakingT.com/That's a Winner Pod. You can get all your apparel there. Anchor, thank you for them for sending us money for you guys listening. You can listen all the time on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all over the place. You can listen there.
Everywhere.
Every time you listen to those audio versions, we get money for that. We appreciate it. We get nothing for you to listen live, watch live, but that's all right. We enjoy the interaction.
Yeah.
We enjoy everyone coming to us. Join our Facebook group. It's just a private group that talks Cardinals baseball. That's a Cardinals winner, I do believe, is the name of that group. So join us on there. It's in our link tree. You can see our link tree is on all of these feeds. It's on our Twitter feed. It's on our Facebook. It's on YouTube. In our bio, there's a link tree. You can find it. Follow the Cardinals discussion there. All right, that's it. You got anything else? That's it.
That's it. Well, we'll be back on hopefully relatively soon with Katie and a little bit more news maybe to talk about.
Yeah, we'll jump on in a week or two, or as something pops up.
Yeah, we'll dive into her. We'll dive in with her on the Arenado news that she broke and him opting back in, and she had a great Q&A with him on that. That had a lot of good quotes.
Yes,
so we can pick her brain on that.
Check that out on The Athletic as well. It's really good. I feel like more access to a player than you're used to, and it's not getting really the publicity that it deserves because it's in writing and not on video. I think is like the best way I can explain it.
Yeah, she does a great job.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm Ryan Jenkins. That's Josh Brown. Thanks for watching that and listening to That's a Winner podcast.
Shooter from the belt to the plate. A swing and a miss, and that's a winner. That's a winner. A World Series winner for the Cardinals. Smith corks one into right down the line. It may go. Go crazy, folks. Go crazy. It's a home run, and the Cardinals have won the game by the score of 3-2 on a home run by the Wizard. Go crazy. Swinging a long one into left field. Adios, goodbye, and maybe that's a winner. A 3-run homer by Clark, and the Cardinals lead by the score of 7-5, and they may go to the World Series on that one, folks.
What a team. What a ride. The Cardinals are world champs in 2011.